All right, so we're moving into part 2 of the philosophy of animation. What we're going to start doing here is digging into feature-length films and looking at the application of some of the constructs we've been talking about. And of course, how we're approaching this then, just to review a little bit, is trying to not think of animation so much as the logical interpretation, which is the intended meaning of the term, of course, which is the process, right? The actual physical act of making something inanimate seem to move. But rather instead what animation has in many ways become, which is its own unique narrative construct, its own rules, its own methods, and ways of telling a story that we seem to understand almost innately, even as kids, that lets it do things that other forms of storytelling, particularly visual storytelling, can't. And even when it's really done well, can create a level of connection to an audience well beyond what live action stories can. And in particular, can create an active participation and creativity amongst its audience. And again, this is when it's done really, really well. If you want to see an example really of what I'm talking about there in terms of what we'll allow within the realm of animation that we won't elsewhere, consider for a moment this moment from Star Wars A New Hope, the original. Now, even at its core, right, Star Wars is this outrageous story full of outlandish things, but we go with it to a point. Within live action frameworks, we will accept magic, we will accept sound and space, we will accept all kinds of things. But what we won't accept is, for example, in this case, when they escape from the garbage compactor and they've been, Luke's been pulled under the water, they're covered in filth, and yet the very next time we see them, they look great, right? And this is where once you notice it, you grind to a halt and you get all internety about it, right? Sort of like suddenly you just feel like, oh, come on, what is there, blow dryers on the Death Star? They had access to a laundromat. We can't go beyond the literal because it's very passive. We've been shown something. It is what we're looking at. Animation allows us to actually move beyond that because we innately understand that what we're seeing is a representation. We are actively interpreting because we can't look at the literal. What we're seeing doesn't literally make sense. And so we seem to understand that what we're seeing isn't literal, both in the terms of the characters, what we're seeing, but also what happens to them. When a character is crushed, we don't think anything of it when they're fine a moment later, because we get that this is expressionistic. What we're seeing is the representation of a feeling. It is, in fact, really through this that things can get more and more abstract, and we become more and more involved in the construction of the story by creating the environment and sometimes the characters itself. This makes it personal. This makes it more powerful. All right. What this does then is takes us out of the passive role of just observer, being fed information, and allows us to construct it being an active participant, which makes it more powerful potentially, and explains perhaps why we connect so deeply to animation as kids. So what do we do with that? Well, we take it and we go beyond the two shorts we've looked at, and we start instead looking at feature-length films. The first way we're going to do this is looking at works that do some pretty interesting things with the construct. So the films you're going to be choosing from have a few things in common. They both are going to have elements that take place in pretty abstract environments. They take pretty outrageous stories and characters that have unique ways of letting us see ourselves in them. But most significantly, both of these films actually are going to use different forms of animation as a way to tell the story, to actually frame the text of what we're seeing through a sort of an understood, a tacit sense that we realize certain types of animation mean certain things. If you have access to both, I would just encourage you, look at the one you don't know as well or that you've never seen. Do them both. I don't know, wherever it takes you. All right, the first film, Spiderman Into the Spider-Verse, is currently available on Netflix. This is a fantastic film. If you have not seen this, maybe you're already feeling like, nope, superhero, pass. This is a really exceptional film. a lot of the story, I guess you could say, is standard superhero stuff, but it's the telling of the story, and particularly the visual representation of the story, that is really something. And what's especially interesting about it is the way the film is going to get more and more abstract, but in particular, the way they're going to use different styles of animation to represent the different characters, the different modes of the characterization, and the different ways we're supposed to interpret the story. In terms of this idea of abstraction, I mean, there are going to be elements, particularly earlier on, that are photorealism or even photo. And as it moves along, it's going to get more and more cartoonish. We're going to see blends of things that are more realism and more abstract expressionism, until finally, towards the latter part of the film, it's really going to become just splashes of color, and in a way, the atmosphere becomes basically what the characters are experiencing. Yes, it is in fact happening around them, but we have to constantly interpret what we're seeing. So this is a very interesting film, which I would really suggest checking out. All right. The second option then is WALL-E, and this is available on Disney Plus, Pixar film. This is another one that is sort of deceptive. It's one that people hopefully have not avoided, because this is a beautiful, beautiful film. The first 30 minutes might be the best thing Pixar's ever done. Arguably, this is the best love story that Pixar has done, and that's part of what's really interesting, is it's between two characters given as little human qualities as possible. But if we go back to the McCloud reading, that is in fact an asset. It's also compelling because of the way that it takes a very dark story and it is able to tell it through this medium of animation. But what's especially interesting is the style of animation. When we see the mechanical, it's done with incredible realism and attention to detail and texturing and lighting. The parts with the humans are just cartoons. And that's an interesting juxtaposition. Obviously there's something going on intentional there. And I mean, really look at the style of animation here. You would never even suspect these are from the same movie. So that tells us that they're doing something with it. Is it profound? Not necessarily. But that's interesting, and that's worth digging into to look at how does it frame the narrative. So what you're going to be doing for this film, and again, either one, before you start just kind of reviewing the terminology, thinking about how these different styles, who are they for? What kind of person is drawn to them while you're watching it? And this is in the assignment parameters. You're just making notes on the visuals. How do they reflect expressionism? What characters are we supposed to connect with, and how do they get us to do that? And then in particular, where can you see the style reflecting the content of what we're seeing? And then afterward, the first thing we'll do, you just kind of review your notes. 2-paragraph, just informal writing, digging into what stood out. What did you notice? What does that tell you about the story? What can you see that's being done here? And as I say in the assignment parameters, try to get beyond the literal. Try to get into what are they really doing with this story? We'll be doing more with it later, but this first step, articulating your ideas, and then we'll discuss. Be sure to get that into Google Classroom by Friday at the end of day, and then we'll review, revise, and move into part 3. Email me if you have questions, and otherwise I look forward to talking with you.